Cold open. We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince. But those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne,
Aaron Yeger,
And Andrew Helmer as Barry.
a Radio Gizmo production.
Welcome, one and all, to another fabulous episode of That Was a Show.
Hello, everybody. How's it going today?
Hi, Barry. Hi, Brynn.
Hi. Hi, everyone out there.
Good, good. Everybody's been properly greeted.
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't been rude. We've given the proper obligatory greetings.
Greetings
Indeed,
and
indeed.
salutations.
Yeah.
And salutations.
Oh, salutations. That's a good word.
I didn't give anybody no salutations.
Damn it.
What are you wearing? Uggs there, Aaron?
No, I have an ice pack on one of my ankles.
He sprained his ankle randomly at a very,
Because were you running like 20K in like 38 seconds again?
I was running, but I was actually taking it real slow and easy, and I wiped out on some slippery debris on the ground.
yeah.
Slippery debris.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Please welcome to the stage.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Oh my God, that would be a great, like, stripper
Slippery
name.
debris.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
Well,
God.
how are you? Are you feeling all right there with the?
it's fine. It's,
He was just more mad when it happened.
yeah, we're
Because it's a very inopportune time
Yeah.
to have something like that happen.
we're busy in general. Plus, we're leaving on our trip soon, and the trip's going to involve lots of walking. And I'm just like, I've been running on a very regular basis for 5 years. This is the first time this has happened. So
Yeah, you don't seem to injure yourself as
It's-
much as anybody else I know.
Yeah, it's probably because you're going slow. You're not used to going slow. Yeah, this is a running podcast now. This is a sprained ankle injury podcast now.
I probably have just as much to say about running as I do Bob.
Oh, really? All right, interesting.
There's a segue. It's a segue.
Yeah. Okay, Aaron, get into the whole intro thing that we
Okay.
do.
Well, I'll tell you a bit about the show I chose for today's episode. It's an interesting one that I've been meaning to do for a while, so I guess I'll tell you a bit about it, and then we can discuss it and see, what we all think. The show's called Bob, and it's starring Bob Newhart. He plays a character whose name is also Bob, but the character is, he's Bob McKay instead of Bob Newhart. In his younger days, Bob was the creator of a comic superhero called Mad Dog, but now he's a middle-aged man who has spent the last 20 years or so working as an artist at a greeting card company, and he doesn't seem to be very happy. Bob lives with his wife, Kay McKay. That's her name.
Terrible character
McKay.
name.
Played by Carleen Watkins. She's pretty much just a nice, supportive, and caring person. There's actually they're kind of a sweet couple. Their adult daughter, Trisha, lives with them. She's played by Cynthia Stevenson, who has a pretty prolific career. You'll probably recognize her. And they also live with a friendly cat, which might be intended as some sort of an irony, since the animal he's known for is a mad dog. Anyway, so
Oh my God, you're trying to deliver this like Bob Newhart, aren't you?
anyway, so the big premise here, and this is the plot of the pilot, by the way, is that Bob gets a phone call out of the blue from a comic publisher offering to resurrect his character of Mad Dog. So naturally, he immediately quits his job with the greeting card company over the phone, which is probably not the ideal way to go about that, and gets super excited. But then you see he meets Harlan Stone, the head of Ace Comics, who turns out to be a loud, intense, basically they're opposites and they butt heads. Harlan wants to turn Mad Dog from a kind of old-fashioned superhero aimed at kids to more of a gritty vigilante, cleaning up the streets, which, according to Harlan, are, something of basically a crime-riddled hellscape. So then he goes crawling back to the greeting card company, but then finds out that Harlan is actually a big fan and is willing to meet him halfway. And he decides to take a chance and try to make a go of his big comic book dreams. So that's the show. I've wanted to do this one for a while because, Bob Newhart is something of a legend who's known for a very particular style of, it's sort of a stammering deadpan sort of delivery. His previous sitcoms were very successful. So that's good. That's something. Oh, and the second season of Bob has a bit of a retooling where the comic goes bust and he takes over actually as president of the greeting card company. And Betty White joins the cast. So that's pretty good, right? So that's the story of Bob.
Yep.
Yeah.
It sure was.
Is. And you committed the hardest to a bit I've ever seen you commit to. Bravo. I mean, I was so confused about what was happening.
I was like, what is going on?
Is it okay? And then when Barry piped in and goes, oh, I see what he's doing.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, of course.
I'm gonna be honest.
That would have been so challenging for you. That's not your cadence.
It's not my cadence. And although I wasn't sure if I'd stick the landing of the delivery, I was fairly sure that both of you would catch on a lot faster to what I was trying to do. So I'm actually pretty pleased with myself in the sense of the surprise that I achieved, because I thought you'd both realize by one sentence in what I was doing.
Well, no, because, I want to give somebody the benefit of a doubt that they're not just stammering through something, right? Which is interesting because, if this was anybody's first encounter with Bob Newhart, it was not mine. I can imagine, jumping into a Bob Newhart show and just being like, what the fuck is going on? Just say the line. Just say the line, bud.
Yeah.
Because, Bob Newhart, essentially, his style of delivering a joke is not so much delivering a joke as, him, umming and ahhing his way through every single sentence of dialogue ever handed to him.
True. So,
and people basically... I'm the guy who doesn't jump on generational trains, but basically, baby boomers ate it the fuck up.
Okay, but to be fair, this old millennial here across the internet from you really, really enjoed it.
Yeah.
I ate it up.
God,
I
really?
ate it up. I was thoroughly entertained.
Now, before we go into talking about the actual show, let's give a little more context. So for anyone listening who doesn't know, Bob Newhart, his most famous show was called Newhart. Prior to that, I think he did a show called The Bob Newhart Show or something.
And he was just a general TV
he was
personality, comedian. He was out there.
By the time this show came on, he was very well known, and the previous show...
He was 2 decades deep into basically this exact same thing.
And Newhart was a very successful show. And, one of those shows of that sort of, I guess it was was it late 70s into the 80s or mostly in the 80s? But Newhart was very successful. And what's interesting about his style that I was realizing watching this show that differs from, I'm going to use Dr. Doctor as an example of the polar opposite. And a show that I did not think worked, but for other reasons. So Bob Newhart has made a career over being the straight man in comedy terms. So usually he he derives his humor from these reactions to other people and from reactions to situations, and the way that he kind of does this. It's known generally as the stammering deadpan that he does. I didn't come up with that term. And he's super deadpan. He's super consistent with that. But you see that the other characters around him are often the ones who are like silly, over the top, emotional. They're either like really sappy or really angry or really silly or something. Like they're up here and he's down here at this deadpan.
You can't see his gestures because it's a podcast.
I'm gesturing up and down. So it's interesting conceptually that whereas a show like Dr. Doctor, you have your main character who's supposed to be the big funny clown and everyone else around him is like a normal person. There's something refreshingly not egotistical about Bob Newhart's style of creating a platform for everyone else to be the funny ones in the scene, even though I think like ultimately, I know I can tell you're
skeptical.
I can tell you're skeptical, but I just think like as a show that's able to make for like a better ensemble, I think it works nicely because he's not trying to be the biggest personality on stage. He's actually trying to be like the most low key one, even though his low key became this thing that he's so famous for that like people watch for that reason.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine, at least at this stage of his career by the early 90s, I could not imagine having a worse scene partner, because no matter what you do, he will in no way give you anything.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
I this is my problem, is I don't dislike Newhart's style of humor. I actually have managed to, and I'll be honest, I don't know which one of the other ones I've seen a lot of. I feel like I've seen a fair, and by fair bit, I mean a half dozen or so episodes in my years. I think of Newhart.
Mm-hmm.
Newhart obviously has like one of the most famous like endings in television history, so like that I've seen obviously, but like at this juncture of his career, like this feels so lazy, and not just his style of delivery. I feel like they're like, and Bob will just do his thing and we'll call it an early day. Like there's no real
But that's what a lot of these
at a joke.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what a lot of these sitcoms did. That, like, they bring in a ringer, like they bring in like a legend, and it's like, okay, let's just like make this vehicle for them.
Yeah,
and like add some younger people into the mix, and like make it a whole thing, and it'll be fine for everybody. Everybody will like it.
Case in point, you enter Betty White into this.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, it's like the least I've ever gotten out of a Betty White performance, because like there's no give and take.
Yeah.
Well, I would actually blame the writing that Betty White was given, in my personal opinion. Like I don't think the character she was given was very good.
Yeah.
And but we can talk about that more later, because that's the post retooling issue. But putting aside the Dr. Doctor and Matt Frewer reference, another reference would be, what was the show? Was it Davis Rules that had that comedian
Jonathan
Winters?
Yeah.
So Jonathan Winters is another example of these actors who's was a big popular comic who you bring in as this ringer at the time. And whereas Jonathan Winters in that show was like, I'm coming in to steal every scene, to chew the scenery, to like rip the wallpaper right off the walls. That's how much he's chewing the scenery. He's like, I'm going to take a bow for the audience. I'm just going to kick the furniture out of the way. If I'm on this stage, this is my set.
That's a good point.
Whereas I feel like Bob feels like he's there to be part of a bigger ensemble, part of a family, and he's there to do his part, which is this deadpan sort of thing. And if you see that first scene in the pilot, when he goes into that office and there's that comic creative director guy who's like the really big personality, who's very mercurial and very like passionate and angry and stuff like that, it's kind of like that guy gets to steal the scene.
Right.
Or the cat.
Yeah, the cat. God, Guys, like
Cat's great.
this is another iconic moment for Twas, because we get another incredible cat performer. I really wish I had looked into that cat's previous credits, because it was incredible. He played Otto. Was it Otto?
Otto the
Otto.
cat.
It's
Yeah.
Otto the cat. Yeah.
Oh my god,
I
it's
have a-
so
I
good.
think it was. I'm pretty sure it was 2 cats.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, we love a good cat performer. We love like cat moments and things because we're a bunch of cat people. So
This might have been the most cat performance in
and like
a show that we've
and
seen.
Bob's character is a obsessive cat dad. Like he's like building an epic like cat tree in one scene, and like he loves being a cat dad. It's very sweet. I just wanted to jump in and say, like, it's so interesting, Barry, to hear like kind of your perspective as someone who has seen some Newhart stuff. I have to admit today that like as much of a TV nerd as I am, I hadn't seen anything. Like I had seen him obviously in guest role things, like and in like the odd movie that he had been in, like he'd been in Elf and stuff like that. But I knew how important he was, but I never like watched any of his shows. This is literally the first thing that I've seen where he's like a leading role.
Brynn was like surprised at the performance. Like she didn't know what to expect.
I didn't know, because I think of someone from that era, and I think of like a Jonathan Winters. I think of a hammy,
Da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah, like that's what I think of, like someone who's very like, hey everybody, like I don't think
or
of
Rodney Dangerfield, like someone who's gonna kick in the door and take
like,
over.
I didn't know like deadpan comedy even existed back then. Like, let alone, so I actually really found it very entertaining. So I'm going to like watch a bunch of Newhart stuff like after the fact, because I actually found it very entertaining. However, I'm sure it will get old. I'm sure like the novelty will wear off after a while. But I was like, very pleasantly surprised watching this. I was like, this guy's so funny. I found his delivery to be so like you can see I don't know. I just love a good delivery. That's my thing. Like I will crack up at like the most, like we're rewatching Superstore right now on Netflix, and there are certain performers on that cast that just completely do me in every time. And the line itself won't be a hugely comedic bit. It's just literally their delivery. Like Lauren Ash, who is like a Toronto, shout out to Lauren Ash, who's like a Toronto gal, former Toronto gal. I'm sure she lives in LA full time now, but she is so hilarious on that show. And it's all the delivery. Like it's all just like her, like pitch perfect delivery. And that's kind of like the thing that I get out of like Bob is like, yes, it's his shtick. It's his usual shtick, but apparently, but it just kills me. Like, it's like the whole, like there were so many like things where I like chuckled like out loud, like, and was like just delighted. So I don't know. It's really interesting, but apparently, like it is something that he did for his entire career. So maybe if I did watch too much of it, I'd be like, all right, Bob, we get it.
You know what it is? So I know I'm coming off really harsh. It's when I look at this, I know it's an imitation of his better stuff, right?
Okay.
So to use as another example, right? Sadly, the most apt thing I can think of, never a timely one. You would think about the Cosby Show, right? And then you take the Cosby Show where he's, Cosby always had a very iconic way of delivering lines as well.
Very
had his own style of
Yeah.
delivery. Cosby Show where he is surrounded by just such a wonderful cast, right? You got your Felicia Rashad, you got your Malcolm Jamal Warner, Lisa Bonet, all these people, right? And then you take that and you do it in the multiple other times they tried to do that.
To spin
and
it off.
never worked,
Yeah.
right? Or even say the Michael Richards show being a good example.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. I mean, thank God out of the examples I'm using, Bob Newhart, still going strong and uncanceled.
Yeah, well, I guess that's where so actually, although I'm super familiar with his delivery and I've seen over the years moments of it, so like I knew what to expect, I've never really watched his other shows, like seen whole episodes of them. And I know that it's famous for having like a super famous ending. I actually have no idea what happens in that ending.
Now I want to watch it.
So maybe what it is I've only gotten him in like little tidbits over the years. And so it was exciting for me to see a bigger chunk of him doing this kind of delivery. And I don't have that comparison.
So you would do the So for me, it's seeing him do this with a cast that isn't up to the task. A cast that isn't like his delivery isn't doing any favors for, because like you said, you nail exactly this. Like his style of performance is about bringing better, big laughs out of other performances or his reactions to things. Where in this is like all the characters are so hollow that like it just, for me, I'm just like, this is not working for me at all. Right. Like his wife is such a non-character that it's like upsetting. Like,
well, there's all kinds of stuff to be said about the casting.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, like you're like, oh, they're
it.
happily married, and I'm like, and not once are we commenting on this like vibrant young woman married to somebody in his mid 60s pretending that he's 40.
So yeah, exactly. Like so Charlene Watson is it Watkins? Watkins, apologies. So she was only 40 when this was made, and he was like, like Barry said, like in his 60s.
Yeah, he would have been like probably 63 at this point. Yeah.
And Cynthia Stevenson, who played their daughter, was 30.
Yeah, which is funny because she comes into it, and I remember just being like, this character, like Cynthia Stevenson, I'm like, this character's supposed to be younger than she is. Like the character, they're writing her like she's 18, but I'm like, it's Cynthia Stevenson. So she has all these like, I can't really get along in the world like lines. And I'm like, you're 30.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that.
And that's not part of the joke. Like the part of the joke isn't, she's still
supposed to be a very young woman. She's supposed, like the character is written as like someone who's like, a really young 20-something, like kind of, figuring out life, like you said.
I took her to be someone who's maybe like college age.
21,
21 to 24.
Because I think that Bob is supposed to be like mid 40s.
Yeah, well, it's all very...
Bob is supposed to be... He's been working at the greeting card company for about 20 years after bailing on his previous... like aspirations as a comic book artist. So I took him to be...
he didn't bail on it. They canceled it.
Well, they canceled that comic, but he obviously could have worked on...
No, it sounds like it's the only comic he ever made.
Yeah. But I took him to be about 50.
Maybe.
Is the intended age of the character.
I'll give you 50.
And
because
I took the daughter to be about 21 to 25. Yeah. And... yeah, I agree. Like, the casting age-wise is way off.
Yeah, but it always is,
the other characters were written very two-dimensionally.
Not this bad.
So basically every actress is playing much younger than they are, or much older. Like, it's so absurd. It's like they're either 40 and playing 30, or they're 30 playing 40 because they don't want women to actually look like, they're, I don't know. It's really annoying. But men are allowed to be like old and schlubby, and it's fine.
Well, it's a perfect hot mom schlubby dad.
Yeah, it
situation.
I wouldn't go there. I don't think I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say I don't think Bob Newhart ever counts as schlubby dad. He's Bob. He's his own thing.
Well, yeah.
He's just Bob
He's his own
Newhart.
thing.
He's not Kevin. He's in no way a Kevin James, which is schlubby dad.
You know who he really reminds me of, Aaron, is Drew Tarver, who was in his whole sensibility, who was in the other two. That was we just saw pop up in Superstore as well.
Mm-hmm.
They have a similar vibe, like a similar charm of like.
I agree. Like it feels like
not looks wise, but the way they carry themselves.
I get what you're saying,
the delivery.
Barry. Like he did Newhart. It was a super successful show.
Yeah.
Network executives or producers were like, let's keep this run going. They were like, they're at the craps table and they're just like, let's let it ride. And
I think a good example would be if Friends ended and then Joey went for another 10 years. And then in the mid, 2000s or whatever, Matt LeBlanc was playing Joey again in a different group of friends, but it was the third run.
Yeah.
I think part of the whole thing is that, by all accounts, I didn't dive too deeply into this, but on a surface level, it does seem like he's just sort of a beloved guy. People liked working with him and still like working with him. And that could be the reason why he kept getting all these spin-offs and
absolutely.
It's the success of his.
It's an easy sell.
Yeah, it's an easy sell. Yeah.
And so I actually think the premise of the show isn't bad.
Yeah, kind of a fun premise.
And I thought his character, being someone who wanted to be a comic book artist, ended up working at a greeting card company, and gets some opportunity as a middle-aged guy to maybe resurrect that original dream. I actually thought that was fine.
That's a great concept.
I agree that
it is if they had any concept of how comic books were made.
Yeah, so
yes.
I agree that beyond the premise.
Yeah, Barry, you can speak to this maybe a little.
Beyond the premise, it did feel like a lot of the other characters and a lot of the other attributes of building out that world were kind of quickly and roughshod sort of cobbled together.
Yeah.
It feels like they kind of put it together in a week sort of thing. I thought that there were funny moments though, and it's I reacted the same way as Brynn, where it's I was genuinely laughing at many times throughout the show.
What'd you guys think of that call waiting bit?
Oh God, I noted that because I was like, this could not be any more early, 90s baby boomer humor where it's there's got to be a call waiting flub and a call waiting gag.
Well, I was more maybe not that. I was more how that scene just had him repeating the same dialogue for about 4.5 minutes straight.
That scene was really dragged out.
Yeah.
That scene did not work. I don't know. I thought there were parts that worked, parts that didn't. There could have been more put into kind of making these other characters more dimensional. That's the biggest thing, is that the wife and daughter could have been much bigger characters, and that's kind of necessary for him to match with him.
I did think that Cynthia Stevenson had a lot of good. I don't know. I thought she did stand out a little bit. I thought she had some real. There were a lot of her lines that I chuckled at. She did have some good delivery because she always has a good delivery. In things.
Oh,
and
yeah, always.
I thought, I liked in the pilot, there's that joke about, he apparently they never told her that he once had a comic book.
Yeah.
And,
that was a funny bit. You used to be interesting.
And she's like, oh, I didn't know you used to be interesting.
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, it was a long time ago. And then later they do a callback to it. Because his wife is like, oh yeah, and this character is based off of me, and the character's described as plucky girlfriend. She's like, oh, I didn't know you used to be plucky, and she's like, yeah, it was a long time ago. It's a cute. I thought it was. I don't know. I thought it was very clever. A lot of it, and I did think, I do think that the wife character didn't have enough. But I did think that the daughter had a little more. But it was to play with.
It was nice that that they as a couple were not like it wasn't built around conflict.
Yeah, there was no conflict.
It was interesting
it was
to
kind
see.
of cute. Like they had a good partnership. They were just kind of this like dorky couple who were kind of fumbling through, figuring out what to do with their later careers and stuff like that. Like I thought it was like they were always a united front on things, which I thought was sweet. Whereas like in a lot of sitcoms, it's like a lot of like, naggy wife and like.
Never Newhart style.
Yeah.
Never like he was never like Newhart is Newhart never seems to punch down. And he never seems to like he's his style of humor, which is nice, it's never mean spirited ever.
Yeah. And you know what? It would have been so easy for a show like this after the success of the previous show, and they're like, let's give him another vehicle. To be like, okay, we're going into the 90s. Let's make it edgy. Let's make it like, let's do something that's like, let's be fresh and let's be like, it was actually nice to see that they kept it authentic to his style of humor. And they didn't, this show compared to most of the shows we've reviewed recently does not really have examples of punching down or things where they like don't stay in their lane. Like,
it was a relief to see something like this instead of some like real trash.
Yeah,
like you're on the edge of your seat waiting for some sort of awful, like thing that's gonna be offensive or whatever. But I will say, like, where that whole thing comes in, like, I think that they're making a comment on, 90s. We needed things to be edgy when they go to the comic book company because Harlan, what's his name? Harlan. What's the character's name? Anyway,
Harlan Stone.
Harlan Stone. He wants to take the character, like the character of Mad Dog, in an edgy direction. Like he wants it to be dark and edgy,
dark and gritty.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that business that happens there and the dynamics of the characters in that office are the thing where they're throwing Newhart into this like 90s world, and just watching the clash of that sensibility and him.
Yeah, and his reaction is not like, I'm going to try to be part of that world. His reaction's like, no thanks.
Yeah, no thanks. I'm just going to do me and hopefully this works. Like it is like the fish out of water trope. So, but yeah, it is just kind of weird. Like it is just kind of weird because it's like everyone is performing at like is like quirky and weird, and then it's just him. So but there's no commentary on that. Like there were moments where I was just like, wow, this is like a really odd pairing, where it's just like that scene where, or like the actually I guess it's the additional show episode that I think Aaron and I watched with the, like, basically there's like a Barney-esque character.
Oh, it's a straight up parody of Barney.
Yeah, so they give Bob someone approaches Bob within the company to do a comic based on this character that's like a children's TV show character.
It's Willie the Mammoth.
Willie the Mammoth. It basically is Barney. It's like a very, like, he has like sings and rhymes, and, he's in a brightly colored costume.
Yeah, and he sings like Barney. I love you, you love me. Like it's all like
and
that.
I would imagine the older writers on this being very confused as to how Barney was a thing.
Yeah.
And by the way, I just want to say Barney came out in 92 season, and this show is parodying Barney like a minute after Barney hit TV.
Again, it's the writers being like, can you believe this shit on the air?
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so they approach, they approach him to do this comic, and he's very skeptical about it, but he still gives it a go anyway because he's a company guy. He's a team player. And then there's one point where he's talking to the other younger, like the weird kind of stoner cerebral guys that work there, and Harlan, and he's describing, he's he's like, they're all like, why didn't you turn that down? He's like, I didn't think I could turn it down. I didn't think that was like an option. And they're like, yeah, we don't do that stuff. Like basically implying that he's kind of being a sellout, agreeing to do this. And like, so he's like trying to describe what he's doing with it in a very Bob Newhart way. And everyone else is like so kooky and weird. And he's just doing his stammery thing. So it's just like, his thing is more grounded. Their thing is like over the top and weird. So it is like an odd, he does feel very out of place. I found it humorous just because there was like that there's a beat in that scene where he's trying to like justify his take on the character, and he's like going into this like bullshitting his way through an explanation of what he's doing with the comic to like explaining it to the other guys there, and then he's like halfway through he's like, I didn't know I could turn it down. He's like, I didn't know I didn't have to do it.
Yeah, he doesn't. He doesn't want to do it, but he's just like, he's so used to. To me, I think that's a reference to like coming from 20 years at the greeting card company, where he was so used to just pumping out whatever pablum they made him do.
Yeah,
and then he's at this comic book publisher, and then this thing comes in, and it's like, oh, I guess I have to just.
Or 20 years doing network sitcoms with CBS and not realizing actually a lot of that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like actually the comic book
real meta.
Where I was taking the comic book thing is like I said, like it doesn't, there's the slightest element of truth they're talking about in like wanting to go darker with comic books and stuff like that. This would have been big in the late to early 90s. Comic books were starting to change big. So somebody knew a little bit about what was going on with that. But it really reads as a lot of older writers being like, I don't get why things have to change. and this is how stupid things seem to me now. Whereas like what was really happening was comic books for a good chunk of their history were pretty tepid. They were pretty like, they weren't allowed to write about things, right? Whereas in the 80s and 90s, you came into this thing where it became more, especially in your superheroes, shift. Where there was more, people were more into questioning authority and more like, this is how this makes sense in today's world. Whereas not, this is more like, why they got to change it when it was perfectly good before? Whereas like, I think that's a little bit of like whereas you're seeing Bob kind of react to that in real life. Whereas like, I've been doing this for 20 years and I don't see why we have to do things. And it seems like everybody wants things to be darker and stuff like that, but it doesn't necessarily work for Bob. So I think a lot of that is kind of a meta commentary on maybe the ideas that were being thrown at him to do another sitcom. Especially, he was only off the air for like probably 2 years at this point. So I'm sure they were like, we gotta be back in the Bob Newhart business. We gotta be back in the Bob Newhart business. And I bet you they pitched him a whole bunch of mean shit. And
he was like, nope.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked. Yeah. He's not that kind of performer, right?
And that could be true. And I also think this show did have a lot of commentary about things that were changing in the world, particularly in America at that time, 92, 93, right? So yes, there is like this,
which we saw in Love and War as well. Actually,
there's
moving into this decade.
Yeah, there's this shift he's pushing back against, relating to the comic books and relating to like his career. But there's also all of these like smaller references to things like him getting the portable phone and the way that the creative director of this company is. It's not just that he wants the comic to be different. His worldview and his motivations, like the dialogue of Harlan, is that sort of cynical postmodernism that you get into starting in the 90s that we see in a lot of the big successful sitcoms of the era, are characters who have a much more like cynical, sometimes even verging on nihilistic take on the world, where they're not into the sort of like sweet moralizing. And so I feel like a lot of this is built around, yes, Bob is like this older guy, older than most of the other characters that he's playing opposite. And he's kind of stammering. He's stammering his way through all of these changes in the world. And I guess what I appreciate about that is that, as compared to a lot of other shows, it's not about him saying that those things are wrong. It's more about him just saying, like, I don't get it. It's not necessarily for me, but like, you do you, I'll do me. Like, he's not a combative person. And so that's nice. But on the other hand, yeah, like obviously a lot of these jokes are super of their time, and it's impossible for a call waiting joke to be funny now. But like Seinfeld has a call waiting joke. So
I'm doing one of those things where I'm talking myself into finding this show a lot more interesting than I did when I watched it, right? Where I'm like, a lot of these things I'm saying, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what they were doing there. That's interesting.
Yeah, like
I wasn't picking up on a lot of this while I was watching it.
What's going to happen in our conversation is Brynn and I are going to like it a little bit less after picking it apart.
Always.
And you're going to like it a little bit more after picking it apart.
Always.
Because I think this show was doing more than it made obvious at the time as you're watching it. And, can we talk for a minute about that Orwellian CEO of the company who's just listening in on everything?
That was shit that was really working for me. It actually kind of reminded me. I feel like a gag that would really work in the IT crowd. Just like a really ridiculous. Like I liked it. I liked the voice of the CEO.
Yeah.
I really hope they never show him.
Yeah.
Now, it sounded a lot like the actor that played the maestro on Seinfeld. What's his name? I feel like I have to find that out.
While you two look that up, I'll explain to our listeners what we're even talking about.
Yeah, Aaron, you should probably quickly summarize both obligatory episodes.
I summarized the pilot.
Yeah, you don't have to
pilot.
summarize.
All right.
But what I'll say is, so while Harlan, who we've been talking about, is the creative director type of this comic book publisher. I don't know his exact title, but something like that.
I couldn't really figure out what he did because he was also an artist.
Yeah, but he sort of runs the comic book publisher thing. But the comic book publisher is part of a much larger corporate conglomerate that has a ridiculous name that I don't think I even wrote down. Oh, wait, no, I wrote it down. The American Canadian Transcontinental Communications Company.
And everyone struggles with the name and the abbreviation, which is very funny.
ACTCCC. Anyway, so the CEO of that big multinational conglomerate that owns this comic book company, we don't see him, but he's like always listening in and talking through any device that happens to be kicking around that has a microphone or speaker. So if there's like a radio or an intercom or a phone or a TV, it's just like he's just sort of like magically spying on them and listening in and talking to them from everywhere. And one of the other artists at the comic book company makes a joke to Bob about how it's basically like living in 1984. And yeah, it's a gag, like it's something that could potentially get old, but it's clever. And it just feels like it's part of that commentary of,
I loved it,
that sort of late 80s, early 90s, like Wall Street corporations are taking over everything. And, that sort of pushback against that big corporate machine sort of commentary. Like
it was not that guy, Brynn.
Yeah, Mark Metcalf is the actor, but it's not him.
Okay.
Allegedly.
Oh, Mark Metcalf as in the Master from Buffy. Michael Kumsty is the guy who did the voice on Bob.
Anyway, they have a similar voice and cadence of speaking.
So should I introduce season 2, episode 1?
Go for it.
Okay, so season 2, episode 1, the show has changed somewhat. we are to understand in the backstory of how season 1 ended. We didn't watch the end of season 1, but we take it to understand that the Mad Dog comic failed, and that it seems like that comic publishing company might have actually been like closed down. Some big let me just explain what happened. So I guess what
he's doing it again.
Doing it
folks.
again?
I know, I gotta stop doing it. Basically what happened
Have
is
you been possessed or something?
we were just talking about how this corporation's the American Canadian Transcontinental Communications Company. Anyway, apparently that company gets bought out by some unhinged billionaire, which is a theme that definitely has no resonance today. And
very common in the 90s.
Yeah.
And gets shut down. So basically that whole comic book project gets shut down. And so season 2 begins with Bob, like, we don't know what he's up to, but the plot kicks off with enter Betty White, who we find out is the wife of the owner of the greeting card company. And that guy apparently runs off with his dental hygienist and leaves Betty White. And so she now owns the greeting card company, and she goes to Bob and says, I want you to run it. And I'm the owner, and now I want you to take over. You know the company, and you know publishing these greeting cards better than anyone else here, so I want you to take over. And so now Bob is in charge, but just as she is putting him in the like office of the president, just as he's taking on that role, her son appears out of nowhere, and he's some sort of pretty boy Wall Street asshole, and he presumes that with his dad running off with the dental hygienist, and he loves his mom, he presumes that he's the natural heir to taking over the company. He's a businessman. He's in some sort of sales or marketing type of role. We don't know that much about it, but he's got some sort of successful businessy role. So he just assumes that he's going to get to take over, and he ditched whatever job he had or some important sales meeting and comes running.
He works for the company. He works for the greeting card company. He was off on a meeting for the greeting card company.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it.
Oh, I thought
yeah.
he was working elsewhere and...
No.
He
was
no.
like
He
in
works
some sales executive position for...
So like he has, and that's because he has a point.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it would almost make sense.
So,
but the reason it
right.
doesn't is because of who he is.
Okay. So basically he comes in to say that he assumes he's going to be taking over, but Bob has just been given that position. And so I guess we can assume that's going to be the point of conflict for season 2.
Yeah.
So there you go.
They give him a good, they gave him a new Harlan Stone.
Yeah, he's obviously like a similar type. He's going to be this mercurial, emotionally up and down, more intense counterpoint to Bob's deadpan.
He used that word more than anyone I've ever met.
Only today.
And I love it. No, not only today.
Not only today?
No. I love it. I love it.
I like the woman. I don't know if she's like an office manager or what her role was exactly when he first walks into the greeting card company. The woman behind the desk there. She was funny.
Yeah, did you recognize her?
I thought I did, but I don't know where from.
So she was
Can I do an introductory for her just with 2 words?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Marla Hooch.
Yeah.
Hooch.
Yeah. League of Their Own?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I
So-
thought she was funny.
She's always funny, yeah.
I liked getting into this company, and like even though this is season 2 of the show, I did like how much we learned about Bob as a character through his interactions with all these people that have presumably known him for 20 years. It was interesting. I thought it was an interesting way, instead of throwing somebody into a completely new scenario, you're throwing the audience into a new scenario, but you're throwing a character into an old scenario. So it was an interesting way to reboot.
I have to say, as far as rebooting or retooling goes, this actually felt more organic than what we usually get, because in season 1, we always knew the whole point of him restarting the Mad Dog comic was like his pipe dream that was not necessarily destined to succeed. So the fact that at the end of the season, that endeavor fails and then he has to go back to working at the greeting card company, that's actually like very organic to the original premise of the show. It's just obviously as a result, they're doing a major recasting of a lot of the role.
Yeah, it's a completely completely new setting,
new supporting cast, and
it feels more.
Even the house was different.
Yeah, I mean, it feels.
Was it?
Yeah.
It definitely feels more, like organic. Like he feels like he belongs there more, and his sensibility belongs there more. And there's definitely that element of some characters are bigger than him, in terms of like their emotional tone and everything like that. But like it's not as weird and quirky as the comic book company. Like it's like a little more grounded, I guess. So
yeah, I think it's like maybe if they were trying to overcorrect a little to
maybe
like
they
get it back. Get it back to the 70s, 80s sensibility a little bit more.
Yeah, like whereas in season 1 he's a fish out of water in that company, in season 2 they're like, no, let's put the fish back into the tank where it's happy and comfortable, and let's just have some conflict with other characters whose personalities are maybe clashing with him. But like, let's make the environment something a little more organic to him.
Yeah, you get a whiff of what is going to be the conflict. So it's going to be basically him at odds with the son, like the Betty White's character's son, because he's definitely this like, annoying like 90s yuppie who just wants to like, mix things up and make an impact and be a big shot, and he's willing to like lay everybody off in order
I enjoyed him.
Yeah, in order to save the company money, but he has no real plan about how that's going to be the case. So obviously Bob is going to be the one that like he reacts very strongly to even the implication of that. Like he's obviously going to be the one who's trying to like save the jobs of the guys in the printing press area and all of that.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is going to be him, having to kind of step up and be more of a like leader, whereas that's not his natural state.
I should have
that's not his natural
No, I should have explained that plot point too.
Yeah.
That like the son, so there's a period of the episode where it's not entirely clear who's going to be in charge, the son or Bob.
Yeah.
And the son, his instinct is the like Wall Street mergers and acquisitions hedge fund manager shark type of instinct. He's just like, if we want this company to be maximum successful, we got to trim the fat. We got to get rid of all the dead weight. He's in all those cliche expressions. And he's just like, immediately massive layoffs. Like that's clearly what we need to do. And they actually had like a pretty interesting set piece that's like the print room where they have like the printing presses, which I have to say was like a pretty bold swing for a sitcom set. This big like 2-story high warehouse with like printing presses, and there's a whole crowd of people working there, and they're up on this like catwalk looking down on it, and Bob's trying to explain like these are people. You can't just talk about them like they're numbers on a balance sheet. These are people, and we want them working here. And like we want to make a go of this company for everyone who works here. And he's trying to like explain that. And so, it's almost like it's cliche conversation. It's a cliche conflict, but it's cliche for a reason. Like it felt like the son character is just leaning so far into that it comes full circle to be funny. Like he's this walking chin dimple and haircut who's just like, I'm the business shark who's just gonna like fire all of these like.
But he's clearly like an idiot. So that's what
he's clearly an idiot.
He has no idea what he's doing.
That's why he's like a fun character, because he's like not going to succeed.
Yeah.
But he's going to be an antagonist.
Yeah,
like, he's
because
going to
he's incompetent.
He's incompetent.
Like, his mom knows it.
Yeah.
That's why she didn't give him the job and gave it to Bob instead.
It's obvious that whatever job he did have was something he was just given because of his privilege. Like, he's obviously like that. He's that man-child, bratty privilege trope that we've talked about. I forget what we ended up calling that, but
we have it somewhere.
We've encountered various characters of this era like
where
that.
Where it's like, I deserve X because I am...
Yeah. But I
am like rich boy.
But they're not hiding that.
I think that came up in
no, they're having fun with it. They're having a lot of fun.
They're having fun with it. He gets so whiny. He's like, "But Mom, I thought this was going to be my job."
He literally
starts
about
actively acting like a child at one point.
Yeah, it's funny. It's fun because they know what it is.
Yeah.
They're leaning into it. It's a character. He's a caricature.
Cartoon,
He's a cartoon, just like the cartoons on the greeting cards, basically.
The episode ends with, honestly, one of my biggest pet peeves in writing. And I've seen this employed so much that it might as well be a trope. I hate somebody makes a big important speech that the writers don't feel like writing, and then they find a way to not write it. So in this case, the printing presses are too loud for them. A lot of cases, they'll just cut to a stirring, musical score of somebody being like, and everybody being like, yes, he's right.
Yeah.
Whereas this is a little funnier because they come up with a sort of reason for it, but I just hate it. Just either write the speech or figure out a different way to solve your conflict.
Yeah, basically he gives a speech in the printing press room that is the inspiring speech that convinces Betty White and everyone else there that clearly he should be in charge, but we the audience don't hear it.
Yeah.
And
complete with the studio audience reacting like they did hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. But what I will give a few points to...
They goose the audio for sure.
What I will give a few points to is that the follow-up back at the house where he's recounting what happened and how the situation got resolved to his wife, and because of a noisy kitchen, I think it was a noisy kitchen appliance.
Yeah,
we
that was
still don't
funny.
hear it.
That actually... Yeah, you're right. That actually almost you're right. That did sort of save it for me.
That was kind of funny.
Yeah, the getting it to do it twice is kind of funny. Yeah, you're right. I'll give you that.
It is a Deus Ex Machina to say we're setting up this conflict between these two people who both want to be in charge and both have some sort of legitimate claim to the role. And then they're going to have it out somehow. And the big triumphant speech that tips the balance and resolves it, we don't hear because it was never written, because it doesn't actually exist, because there's no perfect words he could have said to resolve it. So we're just presuming that he could. So
it's interesting because I do feel like the episode, at least where it ends, they both have almost an equal Bob, because Bob is more level-headed, would be better at the job. But the son does still have a claim on being able to do it, having currently being employed there and having, knowledge of. I feel like were the show going to keep going, they would maybe co-manage or something like that, because I think what the show is sort of trying to do is there's going to be dueling points of view on this, but it doesn't quite wrap it up that way. So I really am not left scratching my head on what I'm supposed to get out of the ending.
To be fair, this show got canceled midway into that second season. It doesn't.
Oh, you're right.
It
they only
doesn't
did the
last
12.
super long, and I think the last few episodes weren't even aired. So they only aired about 5 or 6 episodes of the second season. And Barry, you're the one who usually mentions this. We're watching these shows at a stage where we don't know how far these things could have evolved given the time.
Yeah,
and so, for instance, Betty White, very underutilized. The character she's playing does not live up to her capabilities. They're in theory kind of funny. It's cool that her role is the owner of the company and she steps in and she's the one person who's the top decision maker here. And it's kind of funny that she's cutting her husband's face out of all of these photos and burns it in a flaming garbage can. They're giving her
I really like that she hangs one of them back up, though.
Right.
I don't know what, with the burned out face.
Yeah.
Like, she's getting a decent amount of screen time. She's there because everyone knows, like, she's the ringer who's been
She's
brought
the
in
ringer.
I
want to
They've
see
got
them.
2 ringers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So-
want to see them, but their styles of humor, I don't think mesh.
So
Yeah.
both Bob
But wasn't she on one of his previous shows?
Well,
I thought she
Probably.
was. I thought she was on.
she was
Newhart.
probably on
Or
maybe
the
that I
Bob
know of.
Newhart show. I don't
Um,
know. One of them.
not
little-
Newhart, because that would have been on Golden Girls.
A little
Right.
Twas context, though, is that Betty White jumped into this right after the Golden Palace.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
Bob Newhart said Betty White made acting look easy before her death.
Ah.
Yeah, like, you see, I have to say, like, you see Bob Newhart and Betty White together in a room, and 4 big comedians of their time, you can't help but think, like, oh, hopefully some, like, magic is going to come from this, because
Yeah.
they're both so good at what they respectively do. But, yeah, those scenes didn't really, like, do a lot for her. But,
Yeah.
again, we're watching one episode, and it's her
Yes.
first episode on the show. So we don't know how much
How it evolves.
how it could have
Yeah.
evolved. And, you know, even as far as, like, if we had watched 6 episodes in, like,
Mhm.
how her character would have evolved. So we don't really know.
Yeah. We should talk about the Lisa Kudrow
Yeah.
of it all.
Okay. So
Just before, because this is what we're doing. They first worked together in 1960.
Oh.
And then they did this, and then where they worked together was on the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Okay.
And I was just going through that, and then he did some stuff. He ended up doing appearances on Hot in Cleveland as well, which
Yeah.
is way outside of our wheelhouse. But I honestly think we should probably talk about it someday,
mhm.
because I think it's an interesting. Hot in Cleveland would be a very interesting show for us to cover, because it is essentially a
it's a lot of-
sequel series to a bunch of careers from the
Yeah.
90s.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a lot of Twas All Stars.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
You know?
It's Betty, it's Wendy Malick, and it's Jane Leave. I mean, come on.
And Valerie Bertinelli's in it.
And Valerie Byrne. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're going to talk about it someday.
Yeah.
Maybe as a very special episode.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we also, Brynn and I watched a 3rd episode. We're not going to break down the whole plot of the episode. We watched this purely for one particular factor, which is that 3 episodes of season 1, near the end of that season, feature Lisa Kudrow, who comes in as a friend of the daughter, and basically what happens is Bob's daughter, who is, we don't know her exact age, but I'm going to say we're supposed to assume she's around college age. That's just my opinion. But she's an adult daughter living with them, and she's quote unquote finally going to move out on her own. And she decides to move into an apartment with one of her friends as a roommate. And that friend/roommate is played by Lisa Kudrow. And so just had to see what Lisa Kudrow pre-Friends was like on this show.
And the answer is very funny.
Very, very charming.
And like very like she's very much a Phoebe character. Like she's very odd. Like she's brunette, which was
Yeah.
a change. But she is very it's sort of a proto Phoebe. Like
It is.
It's like she's
Kind of like LeBlanc on all that nonsense we watched was a proto Joey.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a similar thing. She's not kind of like the free spirit that Phoebe is. Like she's more of a kind of
But she's an oddball sort of character.
She's an oddball and kind of like spacey, like in the
Spacey.
same way. But she isn't like bohemian and free spirited like Phoebe. But anyway, so basically like they are roommates briefly, and she also dates one of the guys from the comic book company, a guy named Albie, who's also a weirdo.
Is it the leech guy?
No, it's the other guy who's kind of like weird and like
It's kind of like a dorky guy.
So there's the leech guy, and then there's the other guy.
Fair enough.
But anyway, they're like the conflict, like the B plot of that episode is like the daughter now like living with her
He's
friend.
like a Big Bang Theory type of character.
Yeah. But she has to put up with him always being around. And together they're so annoying as a couple. And there's this whole scene that I thought was like really funny where they're like talking about very mundane things. And it's supposed to be this like cute couple moment where they're talking about things they have in common, but it's really mundane, stupid things. And she finds it like intolerable to listen to, and they both keep saying like, she's like, oh, I call oatmeal this, and he's like, me too, and she's like, I call toast this, me too, and they keep saying it in the same tone over and over.
You gotta say the word
mush, and the
daughter made oatmeal.
She can't handle that they're even calling it mush to begin with. Yeah. She hates it. She's like, why, you know?
But let me explain.
Barry's already out.
The daughter made oatmeal, and Proto Phoebe Buffet is like, oh, is there any more? Can I have some? And she says, sure. And says, thanks. I love mush. And it ends up being this thing where she says the word mush like 25 times. And eventually their daughter, I can't remember the character's name. The daughter,
okay.
She has like an absolute breakdown and screams. And she's just explaining like, it's not mush, it's oatmeal. And just like loses her mind.
Yeah, it was a pretty funny scene, but yeah, so it was interesting because it was like you get the like, it was one of her early like recurring things, and she was quite funny. And I'm like, was this while she was dating Conan, or was this like?
As soon as I saw it, my first reaction was like, oh, it's amazing to see how much Lisa Kudrow brought to that character on Friends that clearly did not come from the creators or writers of Friends. Like it's amazing to see how much of Phoebe Buffet was just her naturally doing a kind of style that she does, because you see it all in like one scene here. You're like, oh, that's 90% of Phoebe. Like you give that character different wardrobe and a guitar, boom, you're done. And
I think that's a reoccurring thing we've seen with a lot of the actors from Friends.
Yeah,
in their early work is none of them are flukes. Like all of them, are just pure sitcom magic. Basically, like they all, you know, and we've talked about a little over the time where, you know, as much as we're not always huge Friends fans, it's undeniable to say how talented the cast of Friends is. Like in every, you know, element that we've seen them in, you're just like, oh, you steal this.
Absolutely.
You steal this.
I mean, we'll rip on Friends from time to time, the show, but yes, there's no question the cast of Friends is.
And I think they all brought what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think they all brought a lot of that in with them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like, especially if you watch, you know, maybe the first few episodes of Friends where they're all very, you know, down to earth, where the characters end up is very much influenced by the performances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is the perfect segue to.
Yeah. I agree.
Degrees of Friends.
Jeez, how many degrees of Friends was this?
So obviously, 1 degree.
Was anybody mad about you?
Yeah, 1 degree via our friend Lisa Kudrow, but also
Lisa Kudrow without having to deal with mad about you.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
So, but it's also 1 degree through Megan Cavanagh, who played the admin like woman in the greeting card company. So she and also played Martha Hooch or Marla Hooch. So she guest starred on Friends, and so did Andrew Bilgore, who played Albie Lutz on Bob. He also guest starred on Friends.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a couple of 2 degree connections. So Dick Martin, who played Buzz Loudermilk on Bob, guest starred on Ferris Bueller, which starred Jennifer Aniston. Jennifer Aniston played Rachel Green on Friends. So that's another Twas callback. Bob Newhart, who played Bob McKay and Bob, also co-starred in the movie In and Out. One of his co-stars of that was Tom Selleck. Tom Selleck had a recurring role in Friends. So that's another 2 Degree connection. And then Betty White has a 2 Degree connection that we've already shouted out in previous episodes. So she guest starred on Joey, the spinoff of Friends, which starred Matt LeBlanc as Joey Tribbiani, and he also played the same role in Friends, of course. Yeah.
Pretty good.
I'm surprised that there weren't more writer credits, like writer crossover or director crossover. I can bank on that kind of thing, but there weren't any in this case.
I would assume that most of them were holdovers from the 70s and 80s at this point.
Yeah, totally.
Well, do we want to do some spinning off?
Yeah, we might as well. So I guess I'll start with Charlene Watkins. So she kind of like, I think, retired after this, even though she was only 40 years old, as we said, because she doesn't have a ton of credits after Bob. But she had been acting since the late 70s. So she had like a long career before that. And maybe, her experience on Bob was like, all right, I'm out. She did it like a little bit after that. But she actually guest starred on Pearl, another Twas show. But other than that, she didn't have a ton after that. But she was great. And for the little that they gave her, she was great. So Ruth Cobart, who played Iris, the other comic actor, who I found her whole deal to me looked very familiar. Like her whole, like the way they styled the character with the like oversized shirts and the ball caps. I'm like, there was something very like familiar about that. So I'm like, have I watched this show before? Because I just feel like I've seen that character. Like it was a very odd deja vu moment I had. But she had been like a veteran TV actor. She had been working in TV since the 50s, but then still continued to work after her brief stint on Bob. She reprised her role as one of the nuns in the Sister Act movies.
Oh, that's who she was.
Yeah. She also guest starred on Murphy Brown. Sadly, she passed away in 2002, but, obviously kept working right up to that point. John Saigon, who played Harlan Stone, continued working in TV as well. He found huge success actually as a voice actor. So, which makes sense if you kind of like watch his performance. Like he's a voice actor for not only animated features, but tons and tons of video games. And he's also no longer with us. He passed away in 2017. But yeah, like massive success as a voice actor. Cynthia Stevenson, who we already kind of shouted out quite a bit. I personally was delighted to see her because I feel like she was in everything I watched as a kid. Like that, like I had seen her in so many things growing up, and I'm always happy to see her for some reason. Or not for some reason, because she's great. But anyway, so she starred in 2 other sitcoms that we should probably cover in the future. Hope and Gloria and Oh Baby. So this was like
good show name.
In the years following, she had 2 starring roles in short-lived sitcoms. She also co-starred in like a lot of successful shows, including she played Joy Lass on Dead Like Me. She's
great on Dead Like Me.
Yeah, she is. And she was in Men in Trees. She had a like pretty like big role in that show. She co-starred in Surviving Suburbia, and she's in a bunch of movies as well. Some notable movies she was in were I Love You, Beth Cooper, and Jennifer's Body.
Oh, yeah.
She had a recurring role in How to Get Away with Murder recently, and guest starred recently in The Good Doctor. Obviously, everyone knows what Betty White and Lisa Kudrow have been up to, so we'll just skip right over that. I will say the rest of the supporting cast in both the retool and the first version of Bob, they also have tons and tons of credits. Like everybody's kept working. So their little stint on Bob did nothing to slow them down. So Bob himself is 93 and by all accounts is doing well and is healthy and, still a very beloved figure. And, post Bob itself, that show, he starred in another series, which I'm so intrigued about, called George and Leo with Judd Hirsch. So I think it's kind of like an odd...
And Jason Bateman.
And Jason Bateman, I was about to say. So I'm like...
I've actually seen it. I was briefly watching it.
Oh my gosh.
For another episode we were doing, and then
Oh, is it good?
I don't remember getting very far. Interesting thing here is, how Bob Newhart, he played Bob, Bob McKay, Bob Newhart, all these shows.
All these shows, he was a Bob, yeah.
Yes, well,
he plays George in this one.
Yes, he does. And you know why? It's his name. His name is George Robert Newhart.
What?
Oh.
Whoa, that's earth-shaking. That's wild. Whoa. I'm like now I'm shook. He did work quite a bit after even that show was canceled. He recurred on shows like Desperate Housewives, ER, The Librarians. He had a notable guest starring role on Hot in Cleveland that Barry already mentioned. Some movie roles that were fun include In and Out, Legally Blonde 2, Elf, and Horrible Bosses. And in 2020, he played basically from 2013 to 2020, he kind of guest starred off and on in both The Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon as this character called Professor Proton. And I don't really I'd never really got into those shows, so I don't really know what the context is.
He was a childhood entertainer that was very important to Sheldon.
Okay.
And it was definitely the sitcom writers on that show just having a lot of reverence for Bob Newhart.
Yeah.
And basically getting him to come in and do some Bob Newhart.
Yeah, I mean, there was I was reading a few articles here and there was this article where it was just basically other celebrities gushing about Bob Newhart, and there's this very sweet little anecdote about from Jim Parsons about the whole thing, about how basically the first time they got to act with him on Big Bang Theory, he, they got through their entire rehearsal without the gravity of it all hitting them, the fact that they were getting to work with such a legend. And then as soon as he went on set and they started filming the episode, the audience went bananas, and the audience gave him a standing ovation, and Bob himself started crying, and then the whole cast started crying. And it was a whole thing. And it was whoa, everyone calm down. It's yes, he's a legend, but it was yeah. So this is why I was happy to see all that. I'm oh, by all accounts, he was just a great person to have around. And still is, if he can. It would be great to see him do one more thing, But, he's really up there. He's going on, he'll be 94 in September. Wow. So.
My favorite Bob Newhart is still his just one scene in The Simpsons where he,
yeah.
He's at Krusty the Clown's funeral, even though he doesn't know him, because he's just waiting. He's just waiting for the next funeral to start, but he still says a few words anyways.
That's what it was, because I knew he had a bit on The Simpsons that made me laugh so much, and I couldn't remember what it was.
Oh
so
my
thanks.
God.
Yeah. And and he does
Troy
his
McClure,
exact...
because Troy McClure introduces him. He's
right.
And he does his thing,
just
his rambling.
This.
I didn't actually know Krusty the Clown. But
yeah.
Bob Newhart, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to watch that clip now. So maybe we should check in with Mr. Producer, because I assume, he's of an age and era where he probably has Bob Newhart up on a pretty big pedestal.
I'm sure he does. Hey, kid, what's the brine?
Oh, just doing the show.
Oh, sure. Still doing that little program, are you?
You know it. This week we're talking about Bob.
Bob
Newhart. The sitcom Bob Newhart did.
Oh, sure, the one after the Bob Newhart show.
No, the one after Newhart.
No, that was George and Leo.
No, it was Bob.
Newhart.
Yes, him. So, Bob was the show that...
Bob!
Newhart?
There's a Newhart album?
Back in 2016, I think.
Ah, love the Wilson sisters.
Sure, me too. So, Bob.
The show.
Right. It had kind of an interesting cast. Early Lisa Kudrow, Betty White.
Oh, sure. We had a bit of a thing once upon a time.
You and Betty?
Kudrow, late 90s.
She's been married since 95.
She has.
Yeah. Since toward the beginning of Friends.
She was on Friends?
Yes.
Shit. Who am I thinking of?
I really don't know. Look, do you have anything to say about Bob or not?
Bob?
Newhart.
Great guy, funny guy, had some shows. This was one of them.
Yep. Okay, well, this is definitely the most pointless conversation I've ever had with you.
The most pointless conversation you've had with me so far.
That was not informative. Does anyone have any leftovers?
I will say this. I'm very glad to have had one of those things where upon talking about the show, I became more fond of it as it went on.
Mm-hmm. You know what? Here's my concluding thought I wrote down. I kind of enjoy this show. I don't know if I want to watch a lot more of this show, but it kind of makes me want to watch Newhart. Give Newhart a chance.
I recommend.
You know what it is? Because when I was watching this and I was like, should I watch a third episode to get the Lisa Kudrow bit? And I was like, yeah, why not? It's it goes down easy. It was my analogy is it's easy listening adult contemporary music. From the early 90s, mostly listened to by baby boomers, Michael Bolton or Rod Stewart or something like that. It's just, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but if it's on, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with it being on. Nice.
I think that is this. I think that was the recipe for success with Newhart stuff. I think it was a very comforting thing for a lot of people,
Yeah,
and
he seems
I don't fault that. I don't fault that because there could be worse, you know.
Yeah, and if people who've worked with him seem to say that too, he's just a nice guy to have around and comfortable to work with.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good. Because you actually don't get that a lot with men of his era and success level. You don't get a lot of people saying, yeah, I genuinely liked having him around.
Yeah, look at all the examples I had used to do similar things. And I'm like, Bob Newhart's the only one who I didn't feel like I needed to put a giant asterisk next to his name.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Even though you mentioned two really bad ones.
Yeah. We didn't need to give any disclaimers. Yeah. We can just be he seems to be just a nice, charming guy who does a very particular kind of shtick, and he does it better than anyone.
I watch Elf maybe every holiday season, and he's always a very enjoyable part of Elf.
Yeah,
especially I really like at the end of Elf when they're back visiting him, and it's just very cute.
So I guess if that's pretty much it for the conversation,
oh god,
then I guess we can cut to the credits. That Was a Show is created and hosted by Brynn Byrne, Andrew Barry Helmer, and myself, Aaron Yeger. It's a production of Radio Gizmo in Toronto, Canada. Subscribe, rate, review, and share. Follow us on Instagram and tell your friends about it. That Was a Show?
Radio Gizmo.